And it was not a surprise that she did, given that, she really did stand out when she wrote it that way.
Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. My guest today is a brand strategist and marketing trainer on a mission to disrupt the marketing world and help brands with a vision cut through the noise. She has grown businesses and their marketing across 50 industries in 10 different countries. She's currently a CEO and a chief strategist of marketing consultancy Disruptor Brand, where my guest serves brands and leaders to tell their story louder and make marketing easier. Please welcome to the show, Nimarta Verma.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here, Nimarta. Today, I really want to dive into the job application process with you because I know it's something you're quite passionate about and something that you've really tied in the marketing side of things through your career into the way that you apply for jobs and that whole process. So I want to ask my first question, how has your experience in your attempts at getting a job with the resume and the cover letter and things like that, how has that process for you changed over time?
Yeah, really good question. I think I started out, and I dare say it's probably similar to a lot of new graduates that start out with their resume and their job application process is that, we find a template or we're told that a certain template to follow. And, I write in a way that's really professional and I use jargons like I'm enthusiastic, I'm a problem solver, I am responsible, those terms like that. Go for interviews and just really answer and say what the other person wants to hear. And I don't ask my own questions. And my approach has really much been I'm just grateful to get interviewed and hopefully they give me a job and I'm going to say anything to get the job.
Mm,
So that's really how it started. And where it's evolved to now is that I've been able to inject my own story and personality into my resume and cover letters. I brought, authenticity to them and people really get a sense of who I am from reading those things. And when I am face to face with them, there's still nerves. I think there's always going to be nerves, but it's conversation. It's really about letting them get to know me and also me getting to know them. And it really is about two parties both deciding are we right for each other.
yeah, yeah, cool. I'm so interested to talk about this with you because you do have quite a unique view on this and a unique process for doing this sort of thing. And what does your resume look like now? Because I know that you have that marketing, like you said, you like to do things sort of a little bit unconventional with your resume. What are some of those things, and like how do you actually structure your resume?
Mm. Yeah. So first of all, it's colorful.
Yeah.
Not too much color, but I play with two colors. So
Mm,
I make it look, there is that color element to it. I do put a photo of me. A lot of people say don't do it. It's frowned upon. I just think that people might want to, get a sense of who they're speaking to. So I put a photo of me smiling, not like a passport, sad photo like that, actually like me smiling. And I start out with a little bit of a summary. A lot of people write in their summary something like, looking to excel in a blah, 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 customer service capacity in a dun-dun-dun-dun, like something like that. Yes. So what I
mm,
write in my summary is something like, a marketing strategist. I've worked across these industries. I'm really looking to now widen my skill set into this area or that area. And, I'm interested in strategy. I love solving problems. I find, business is really challenging and exciting. And, those are the things that I'm passionate about. So it's really is a summary of me and my career and what I want to be doing next. I'm not trying to sweet talk them that I'm here to serve them or anything like that at that point. And then I still structure it like a typical resume in the sense that it's chronological, so it starts from the latest job, my latest experience to the earliest experience. But what's different is that for each of the roles, I don't just write bullet points of roles and responsibilities. In fact, I don't have anything about roles and responsibility. I write a few lines about, in this role, here's what I did. Here's what really excited me about this role. Here's why I left. And here's what I'm most proud of. And I actually tell that story consistently through each role. So you'll see, you'll get a sense if you read the whole thing, or, the hiring manager will get a sense of, she's working in this capacity and then she left for that reason, or she did this, or, this is why she made that choice. It really tells the story of my career journey. And I also
Mm.
include things I've learned, hey, from this role, this really challenged me. And here's one of the most valuable lessons I learned was XYZ. So
Yeah.
it
Uh,
really does tell the story of my career pretty much.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's quite unique, and certainly most people would be, you know, I guess almost everyone that has like this sort of cookie cutter type resume where it's like, I worked here, here, and here. Like, here's my three
Mm,
things that I did, or like whatever. And so it's interesting to hear that you would do things quite differently. It's quite. I think the way you're doing it is a lot more personal, right? Because you're actually like
yeah,
often the
absolutely. It's like
person
talking
reading
to
your
someone.
resume. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because the person reading it is a person too, and they probably have similar thoughts, right? They're not just like
Mm.
you know, so I think it does. It
Yeah,
certainly does that. Mm.
yeah, absolutely. They are
Yeah,
bored to death of reading the same kinds of CV over and over
yeah,
again. You just cover the name. It's all the same. And everybody uses those jargons and buzzwords, and everyone puts little keywords on their CVs. Yeah. So I've been in that position as well to read CVs. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, oh, just give me something. Just give me some sense of that you're a
yeah,
human. I just want to know somebody.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
Yeah. So
That's interesting. Well,
I
yeah,
try and do that. I think that's the word is humanize my CV as much as possible.
that's cool. And do you think that that has worked, or do you think like over the times that you've used it? I mean, it's probably hard to compare because you're kind of it's you can't really. I mean, I don't know if you ever have this sort of A/B testing, right, where you might apply for 5 jobs using one and 5 using the other, and then maybe it's still quite a small sample, but you could maybe see if there's some difference. I wonder if it's unlikely that perhaps you've done that, or I don't know, but what was the outcome of that?
Look, as you say, right, it's still a small sample, but I will definitely say that I got more of a response
Mm,
from the ones where it was more, call it like storified CV
yeah.
and humanized CV compared to the templated one. Even if the response was, "Hey, thanks for sending it through. We're not, you're probably not right for us." Even if it was to reject me, but at least there was some kind of response versus the templated ones. I found that I really didn't get that many responses. It was just kind of, you send a CV up into this vortex of silence, nothing, you hear nothing back.
Mm. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. And so if that's the case, then, what would how would you take someone's resume and make it more more personalized, more like down to earth, more storified, like kind
Mm.
of how would you take someone's resume from this kind of cookie cutter thing into and sort of turn it into that? Is there anything that you would first look at and say, okay, this is probably going to make the biggest difference, and then like we'll do some of
Mm.
these other things. What like is there anything that you would how would you approach that?
Yeah, so I've done this quite a bit because I've helped a lot of people with their CV as well.
Mm,
So I start off with really just having them talk to me about who they are and what they want, like who they are in life, what do they want, what do they believe in, what do they care about. Like I want to get them out,
mm,
right? Because a lot of people are so concerned with, I've got to write the CV that everybody wants to see or wants to read. So they're more thinking about, what does the other person want to see? How do I say those kind of the right thing to say? So I always try to get them out of the mindset of, there's no right thing to say. We just want to tell your story. So I always ask them about them, and I always ask them, okay, you did this role here, tell me more. What did you
mm.
do? What was that like? They'll start telling me. And I usually, what really works is I ask them, what did you really enjoy the most about that role? and
Mm.
they'll say something and I'll say, "That's great, write that down." And they'll be like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, write that down." So then they write that. Great.
Mm.
What were you really proud of? What did you accomplish in that role that you were really proud of? Tell me. Then they tell me, it's like, "Oh, that's great, write that down too." Was there anything you learned? Was there a lesson that was really valuable? Great, write that down. So I really try and get their side of it. And I
Mm.
tell them to remove things like, list of roles and responsibilities. Like, no, you don't need to get into that. If your job is really complicated, like you're doing something with data processing and nobody knows what you do, you could just say one line about it. You don't need to list out everything you do and rather tell a story of it than do like lists. And then I also then look to remove any jargons. So for me, words that I see right away and they're red flags and I just remove them right away are words like
Yeah.
enthusiastic, passionate, responsible, strategic, problem solver, excellent communicator, team player, any words like that I spot. I'm like, that's gotta go because it's just another cliche. It doesn't paint a picture of who this person is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's cool, and it's very interesting to hear that because yeah, it's certainly those kinds of things are like most likely I can't remember mine, but most certainly on mine, and if not on
Mm.
almost everyone's. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the kind of
Mm.
putting yourself or using different words to describe yourself that are almost making your resume unique rather than one that looks almost the same as everyone else's. It's what you
Yeah.
were saying
And I
earlier with
think
like the colors and stuff as well. Yeah.
yeah. And I think especially if you're a new graduate, right? Like a lot of new graduates that I work with, they don't have a lot of relevant work experience yet, right? So, some of them have worked at cafes, they worked in retail, they've done internships, right? They now want to apply for a job in their profession. Then we've really got to write out those experiences in a way that I try to find a way to link it to their, how does that experience, how does the skills they've learned through doing a job in retail, how will that benefit them in a job in accounting or in marketing, whatever the industry they're in. So I then focus on that. I go, great. What are the skills you learn in retail? And they might tell me some things. I go, okay, great. So now you're going to become an accountant. How do you think that's going to help you as an accountant? And they might say,
Mm.
oh, I can have it's gonna help me, like, communicate better. I'm like, "Great, okay, we'll talk about that." So, we wanna find a way to make those connections, because we've gotta assume that the person reading is lazy, they're not gonna connect the dots, we've gotta help them connect the dots, and then
Mm.
I then try and bring out more of the story in their summary around what makes them passionate about that industry that they're in or that why do you want to become a marketer? Why do you want to become an engineer? Like, let's talk about that. And usually
Mm.
there's something about them ever since they were a child, they were curious about something. So I try and bring that story out and tell that story from the beginning in the cover letter or in the summary because as a new graduate, you don't have a lot going for you in terms of, um, as I said before, like the experience side of things, it's just the reality of being a new graduate. So how do you then tell your story and engage with people that way? And I think the mistake that a lot of new graduates think is that they think the grade or the academic accomplishments is going to carry the day. And the reality is just that's not what
Mm.
hiring managers look for. They may glance at it, but they really are interested to hear who you are and whether or not you're going to, come into their company and really fit culturally and work well with them.
Yeah. That's really cool, and I like what you were saying even earlier about you know uh, getting a job is like you want to enter into a relationship with yourself and the company, right? And if the company isn't right for you, then you don't really want to work there either. And I think a lot of this
Mm.
personalization and things like that is really putting yourself out there a lot more, and so perhaps companies might not like you as much, but I think the companies that do like you are going to like you a lot more from that, just because you're sharing more of yourself. I mean, yeah. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is now you're talking my language in terms of marketing, right? I'm
Mm.
always telling my clients
Mm.
not everybody has to like you or want to buy your brand, but those who do, then those are the ones that you want. And there's room for
Mm.
everybody. It's, as long as we don't have to think in terms of desperation of scarcity, which is not. There's a right job for everybody. There's a right role for everybody. We don't need to, you can get a job in a company that doesn't fit you. You're gonna be miserable or you won't last long anyway. What's the
Mm,
point? Mm.
yeah.
So yeah,
No,
absolutely.
that's really cool. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, what mistakes do you think people make in their resume? And I guess we can use here. You mentioned that you were actually someone that was looking at people's resumes. I guess that perspective, and then also your own, where you're sort of helping people create theirs. What are some things that you've seen in people's resumes where you're like, okay, that's so definitely don't do that, or like don't do this, or whatever. Is there any like general big mistakes that you see people making?
Yeah. So what I said before about using the buzzword, like the jargons,
Mm,
like passionate, those kind of words, making it really long in terms of it's not about the length. Look, if you're really telling a story about yourself, it's then not a turn on. Like I think my CV is like 2 pages or something, right? So it's not like a short CV, but there's ones where it's like just lists and lists of here's all my roles and accountabilities. Like they probably took it from their job description and just dumped it on the CV, and it really adds no value to the person reading it. So I wouldn't
mm,
recommend doing lots of long lists about here's all of the skill sets that I like my proficiencies, I'm a good communicator. I'm a good team player. I know these programs. Like, yeah, sure. In some specializations, you should list what programs you know and it's of interest. But I see a lot of CVs at least. I know Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, email. I'm like, it's okay. You don't need to tell us that. It's okay. So yeah, I think resumes that are overloaded with detail is a mistake, and I don't recommend it. Like I think the biggest mistake is the mindset more than anything, the mindset of when people
mm,
write their CV, James. And that mindset is that this CV is going to get me the job. And I always tell anyone I work with that the CV is not meant to get you the job. And they always have a shocked look on their face. What do you mean? And I go, the CV is meant to get you the interview.
mm,
And I'm going to want to interview someone that intrigues me, that I want to learn more about. If you tell me every little thing, every little detail about you in a resume, that's already boring me to death. I don't need to know more. And I may not even need to feel the need to interview you. So you want to leave a little bit of mystery, a little bit of intrigue, like, oh wow, that's interesting. Leave them wanting
mm.
more, leave them wanting to talk to you about some of those things that you wrote about.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. That's certainly something that in myself, and I'm sure lots of people, don't consider is that, yeah, the resume is not for like getting you to the end. It's just for getting you to the next step of the process. I think that's so
Yeah,
important
it's
in how
just
you
it's
structure your
into the
resume
job.
and the sort of things you're putting in there. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Oh, like perhaps we can talk about, your own experience with this. And, you mentioned you were doing sort of A/B testing with your resume. I wonder if there's any other times where you sort of played with this personal touch. Has there been any, like you were saying, your people's like kind of, it's obviously something different to receive, right? Is to get a resume that's a bit out of the ordinary. But have you had
Mm.
any interesting experiences with this personal touch?
Yeah, I once I was looking for a job and I just got so sick of it and like not desperate to get the job, but I was just so sick of this whole process and I just felt so fake. Like, oh man, what am I doing with my life? And just this moment at like 10 p.m. at night on a weeknight, and I just wrote this CV from I wrote this cover letter from scratch to this company, and I was saying things like, "Look, I'm just going to tell you first of all, some truths. And I said things like, I'm not a really good employee. I really don't like being tied to a chair or sit in one place and being told what time to come and what time to leave. And I really hate that side of working. I read your job ad and I don't know. I don't know if I believe it. I'm skeptical. You talk about a great culture. Everybody says that. What's the catch? And I said things like, I really wish that the person reading this is just someone who is another human being like me who gets what a ordeal it is to having to talk myself up to somebody that I don't even know through this letter,
Mm,
and how yucky that is, and how much I just really want to find fulfillment and joy in a role. And
mm.
if you're someone who gets it, hopefully we can talk and really see if we're a match for each other. And that was the most honest letter that I ever wrote. And I remember like having like butterflies in my stomach as I emailed it off, and I just went, "Wow, I don't know what I've done." And I showed it to my husband just to kind of get a sense check, like maybe it's not too bad. And he read it, and he was like, "Did you send this?" I said, "Yeah, I did." He was like, "Whoa." And I thought, "Oh man, like what's gonna happen?" And I sent it off like about 10 p.m. that night. And the next day my phone rings even before midday. And it was this company calling, and it wasn't just the manager who was hiring for that position. It was the CEO calling. And he said to me, the HR person forwarded me your letter and said, I have to read this. So he said, I read it, and I read it a number of times. And the most incredible and honest thing that I've read ever in someone's application. And
Mm,
I don't really think this role is for you, but I still want to talk to you, and maybe we could create a role for you because I think you'd be a
yeah.
great fit for us. So that was a really cool experience. That was incredible to receive that kind of reassuring feedback from something that was so honest that it
Yeah,
made me
definitely.
nervous. Mm.
Yeah, that's crazy. That is, yeah, that's pretty incredible. Because yeah, I'll often, I guess even myself, I've thought of, I'm writing my cover letter. Perhaps I'll just, perhaps I'll just throw this one out and write a new one where it's just like,
Mhm.
this, I'm James, like, da 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 da, like, kind of
Yeah.
like you're saying, a bit more
Just
fun, a
me,
bit more like,
just get to
this
know
is just
me.
who I
Yeah.
am. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And it's great to hear that you had such a good experience there with that.
Mm.
Because I think, yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible what that stuff can do, definitely. I want to like perhaps talk a bit about now about interviews and things like that. And I know like
Wow.
you've done a lot of these and you probably help people with this kind of thing as well. When you're coming into an interview, lots of people will kind of they'll have like the nervous butterflies and they'll even think that that's going to sort of negatively impact their sort of experience, like, in the interview because they're just so freaked out that like it's now
Mm.
they get asked a question, they're like, oh, I could just like, like preparing in that way is often unhelpful. How have you dealt with that and the nerves and things like that in the past? And yeah, I'm interested to hear that because it's a big problem I think that people face.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, right, I just felt like I just really didn't deal with it. And I just put on a show, like pretended I was okay when I was really just sweating and nerves everywhere and trying to be cool. But then
Mm,
after years now, having done that and having been on the other side of it, where I saw that the candidates were really nervous and I was the interviewer, and I thought, oh, that's so funny. Like they're nervous. I
mm,
used to be on that other side. So it gave me an understanding of what it feels like to be on the interviewer side. And what I now realize is that people can tell and people understand and empathize with that it is a nerve-wracking experience. Like everybody has,
mm,
even the interviewer you're speaking to, they've also been interviewed. So everybody understands it. And sometimes I feel like even just acknowledging that, oh man, I'm really nervous. That actually is such a great icebreaker. And sometimes as an interviewer, like I actually say to the person, I go, look, I get it. If it's normal to be a bit nervous, do you wanna have a glass of water? Do you wanna take off your coat? Like, it's okay, just relax. Like it's fine. And yeah, that's fine that you're nervous. And I find that they are really appreciative that I've said that to them. So I then learned when I have interviewed after that, just to acknowledge it, just be like, "Oh, I didn't think I was gonna be this so nervous. I've done this a lot, but I'm still nervous." And the other person,
mm,
it's almost like this refreshing moment that you share with another human where they're
mm,
like, "Oh, I'm so glad this person's honest." And it's like you've now addressed the elephant in the room,
mm,
and it just stops being heavy. I promise you, the minute you just go, "Ah, I'm feeling a bit nervous, but I'm excited to be here." It
mm,
just stops being heavy, and you just find yourself connecting with another human. So I think the biggest thing I recommend is just to own that you're nervous.
mm.
Don't try and pretend you're not. Don't try and be cool and fake it. Just own it.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I think that's really good advice, and definitely calling it out while you're in there is something that perhaps can be hard to do, but certainly, to almost cut through a lot of that nervousness as well. I mean,
Mm.
as your experience interviewing and as you've interviewed, what are some interviews that you've done and interviews that perhaps that you've participated in with someone else that's going for the job? What are some things that you've seen in those interviews, or what are some common things in good interviews that you've seen, or and then what could someone do, I guess, to make their interview better? And yeah, I guess from your experiences in the past, what things make a good interview for yourself?
Yeah, so I think that it's always good to be prepared. And I know it's a cliche thing to say, but it really does offer some value when you go in having done a little bit of research about the company. And not like you have to be able to recite back what this company does, but you at least come with some questions or some thoughts about
Mm,
this company or about how this company is positioned in their industry or what you've seen them do. So it always is, and I think a lot of people do it thinking that it will be impressive to do that, like they want to impress the interviewer. I don't look at it from that it's impressive. I think it just offers a rich conversation and a more honest conversation when you're able to really,
mm,
you're not scared about what they're going to ask, because you kind of go, look, I've read your website. Here's what I understand so far. Here's the parts I don't really understand. At least you can have some conversation about it. So I think that's the number one thing, is knowing, being prepared and forming your own opinions about, oh, this is what I've, thought about what you guys do. But here's also what I'm curious about. So being prepared and
mm.
having forming your own views, I think really helps the discussion.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's
Mm.
great because I think often, yeah, research, obviously you want to know where you're working before you apply there, right? But
Mhm.
I think too, like it's useful to go that layer deeper, like you've suggested, where you're finding out perhaps what the values are of the company and kind of what are the things
Mm.
that they do. And like you said, what are the things that perhaps you're confused by and you want clarity on when you're actually in there. I think that's great advice. And yeah, certainly shows that you are actually really interested in pursuing this, and there's things that you want to sort of work out with them as well. I think that's really great.
Yeah. And I think the other thing as well, James, like not being afraid to ask questions. I said before, like earlier in my early years, I was really scared to ask questions because I just wanted to be the good girl who ticked off the boxes for them. And, they would always ask you at the end, do you have any questions? And I'm saying, no, 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 it's all good. Like being so eager. I think that's actually not helpful, because in the end, it also doesn't give you a sense of, well, first of all, you don't have your questions answered, but for them as well, like it helps the hiring manager know your thought process when you ask questions. It helps them understand, oh, this is where this person's thinking from. That's what they value. One of my recent interviews for a brand role, and it was a pet food brand. And I've, done some research and saw some negative reviews of this pet food brand and saw that, some animals have had the food and had a bad reaction to it and were hospitalized and didn't have a good outcome. So that was one of my questions. I said, look, I want to know about your product. I want to know about your quality control process. I read these reviews. Have you done anything to resolve it? Is it true? What's happened with this? And I said, I love animals. I love dogs. I can't work for a brand that, well, I can't be part of a company that produces food that makes animals sick. Like that's not okay. So
Mm.
I want to know. And in fact, that was really, like, one of the memorable things that the interviewer then said to me. I ended up getting the job, and she said to me, "I could tell you really cared, and I want someone like that who really does care in our brand."
Yeah, that's a great story. Certainly, I think there's
Mm.
yeah, there must be a lot of value, and there is a lot of value in going that extra step and you're really being careful about the things you think, and having your
Mhm.
values aligned to the company values too. I think is really cool. Thanks for listening to this episode of Graduate Theory. If you haven't already subscribed to the Graduate Theory newsletter, you can do so via the links in the show notes. The Graduate Theory newsletter comes out every single Tuesday morning with my thoughts and lessons from each episode. But without further ado, let's get back into it. I'd love to touch on as well, because I know obviously marketing is something you're really passionate about, and it's been something you've done your whole career. And I want to talk about that and kind of how that aligns with your personal brand and, you
Mm.
know, branding yourself and things like that, and even perhaps how that ties into your resume and things like that. I mean, what are some things that you've taken from marketing and then applied in these different arenas, like whether it's personal branding or even, back to the application process that we've been speaking about?
Yeah, I think a lot actually. So I'll kind of say two things, but one of the things definitely is around keeping in mind like who's the target audience, right? So from a marketing lens, I'm always looking at who's the target audience for this? What are their frustrations? What are they really thinking? What are they really concerned about? What do they really care about? And when I create any marketing material or marketing communications, I'm always speaking to those concerns and addressing those concerns or acknowledging that, hey, I
Mm,
know that these are your concerns, blah, blah, blah. Here's what we're doing to resolve it, with this brand. The same applies when I write CVs or help people with their CVs and cover letters. And I always first of all ask them, who's hiring for this role? Like, tell me more about the person hiring. So, okay, they are a C-level executive. Great. What are their frustrations? What really frustrates them? What are they looking for? What is it about the whole um, process of filling this role that has really frustrated them, or what might be some things that they look for in this candidate of this role. So when we start to look at it from that lens, we're now writing our CV to address those things. We're acknowledging that, hey, if these are the things that you're worried about, here's some of the answers. Here's some of the things that I can say about that. And then you keep that in mind as well for the interview. And it allows you then to be able to talk to them from where they're coming from and be more empathetic of their needs. So that's really key. One key thread that I kind of pull across from the marketing world to the job application world. And the next part is really about telling the story and being, differentiating myself. So as a brand, I'm working with clients to help differentiate them, help them stand out. So we're always looking at, what is it that makes them different? And it's going to be a combination of things that are like rational things. It may be like your skill sets and you've got this experience or you've worked in this company that's a really good name that's really rare. And then it's also going to be then there's another touch of it, which is like, I call it like the emotional side. So, who you are, what you believe in. Same applies to a brand. So I look at that in a person and go, great, let's look at the experience and technical side of things that makes you different. Let's make sure we tell that story. And now let's look at, what do you believe in? What do you care about? What matters to you? And let's talk about that too. So it's a dance between those two things. And one
mm,
other thing that one of the techniques of really pulling out that differentiation is that not everybody has experiences that line up to exactly to their industry.
mm,
I once helped someone who works as a construction project manager. Like, she wanted to find a role in construction project management, and she had a background in accounting. And a lot of times people get intimidated by that, like switching industries. And what I did in that case for her was I said, okay, well, let's have a look at, you've got this background in accounting. How is that going to give you an edge over everybody else who's only been a project manager and never's done accounting? What do you have that you bring to your job? And she started to tell me, she's like, project managers don't look at numbers. I always look at the numbers, and I always am able to flag it up front when the numbers don't line up because I've got that accounting brain. I'm like, that's gold. We got to say that. That's not in your CV at all. She's like, oh, should it be?
mm.
I'm like, yeah. And so we find a way to tell these kind of stories, these gold nuggets of what makes you different, what you bring that nobody else can bring. And yeah, she ended up getting that job. And it was not a surprise that she did, given that, she really did stand out when she wrote it that way.
Yeah, wow. I think that's really cool, and I love that point you made about, differentiating yourself, because, in marketing,
Mm.
differentiating yourself in the market, but then, how do we think about that in a career sense and when we're looking at your resume and like you said, even with that example, like bring the the things that you can do that no one else can do and really bringing that to the
Mm,
forefront, I think is really, really cool and certainly a great use
mm,
of the marketing and that side of things. I want to ask you now, a bit more about your career and the things that you've done because you've been to many different companies. You've been all across a lot of industries and you've helped a lot of businesses within where you do. So you've certainly been to a lot of places. I want to ask, has there been a time in your career or something that, well, actually, I'm gonna go a different direction. Yeah.
yeah.
What's some career advice that you've seen that is not very good advice that you would say to someone who's sort of following a certain path? Okay, that is not, from in my experience, that you're sort of making a mistake with that. Is there any bad advice that you've seen in the sort of career sphere?
Oh man, I like that question. I have probably gotten a lot of bad advice, so let me think through some of them. I think one advice I think is a bad advice is people say things like, "Oh, just stick to it, stick to the job." That like you don't want to be seen as leaving a job too early. You want to work at least a year or 2 years. I remember wanting to quit my job, and I was there for 4 years, and still people around me were like, "Ah,
Mm,
but it's gonna show that you're not committed. It's gonna show blah, blah, blah." If you look at my resume, I've never worked in any role for more than 4 years was the longest. And then others were like 6-month contract, 1 year, 2 years, I don't know, things like that.
mm,
So I think the whole thing about you gotta stick to a job and work there for 10 years and 20 years, I think that's old school. I think maybe there was a time for that. Certainly my mom did that and it worked for her. And a lot of people I've seen in previous generations, I don't think now is that relevant. I don't think people care about it that much.
yeah, certainly. I agree. I think now, career mobility is even easier, even with things like remote work and things like that, where now we're not even constrained to where we live as to where you can work. I think things like that open
Mm,
up a lot more opportunities, and it means that you can find new jobs a lot easier, even if it's through like online job advertisements. Is something that's reasonably recent. It's only sort of, I don't know, maybe
mm.
15 to 20 years old. Is that kind of whole thing. So certainly, I think the idea of job mobility and if being able to find jobs that has really opened up a lot of doors to young people. Definitely. I've got one last question for you, Nimarta, and that's a question that I
Mm,
ask all the guests that come on the show. And it's almost a flip of the previous question, but
mm.
like part of the graduate theory is career advice and how can young people really grow their career. And we've had some great advice from you tonight, but what's some advice that you would give to young people who are starting their career today?
Yeah, I think really the biggest thing is like it's not life and death. I, and I'll elaborate on that. It's not the end of the world. Like your first career is not the career, doesn't need to be the career you end up with for the rest of your life. And you can change your mind. And you can change your mind
Mm.
2,000 times. And you can switch industries and switch careers and say, or be 10 years into a career and go, I'm really bored of that. I'm going to go do a degree, do a different degree and go to different routes. So I think there's a lot of stress I see about, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-olds trying to map out the rest of their lives. You just can't. You
Mm,
know, you don't
mm,
need to.
yeah.
You don't need to know what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. You just need to know what's the next thing right then and there. Do that next thing. If it fulfills you and you love it, great, keep at it. If it doesn't, then don't settle. Go back and go, okay, well that doesn't fulfill me. What else should I be doing? And don't be afraid to change and switch and change your mind.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's great advice, certainly, and certainly something that young people today, can really take on board. But thanks so much for your time today, Namata. If people are listening and they want to find out more about yourself, they want to connect with you further, where should they go to find out more about you?
Yeah, look, I think LinkedIn's probably the best way to come and find out more about me and read some things that I share and connect with me, send me a message, add me as a connection. So find me on LinkedIn, look up Nimarta Verma, and you'll see that I show up there. Or if you want to find out a little bit more about my consultancy side of things, then the website is disruptorbrand.com, and you can check me out that way as well.
Great. We'll leave all your links in the show notes and descriptions so that if people want to find out more, it's just below wherever you're listening. Well, yeah, thanks so much for your time again today, Nimarta, and we'll hopefully see you around soon.
No problem. It's great to chat. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. I hope you got something out of it, and I certainly did. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Graduate Theory newsletter. You'll get the episode and my takeaways straight to your inbox every single week. Thanks so much for listening again today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.